This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Alright, so this is a new series I'm going to start. This is going to be my short film series. Now I'm not going to just start making short films and putting them up on YouTube immediately. What I'm going to do is try to break down the process of what you would do to make a short film or a narrative in general. Any sort of narrative, whether that be a short form narrative or maybe a long form narrative, either like a movie or a TV series. I'm just going to break down what I know about narrative filmmaking, and I'm going to try to apply that and create little scenes on the channel and talk about how and why I did certain things. Now I'm going to do this in a couple ways. I'm going to talk about the narrative structure and dialogue and why I'm writing it that way. And then I'm also going to break down how I lit and shot these scenes as a little bonus, because obviously lighting is a bit more of my specialty than narrative filmmaking as a whole. But that's something I kind of want to exercise because like I've said on the channel before, I ultimately want to do some sort of narrative filmmaking. And that has to be a good way of trying that out myself and exercising that side of my filmmaking brain. So at first, I'm just going to make very short, small scenes. And I'm just going to use narrative principles to create these scenes, and then I'm going to show those to you guys. Because basically every scene in a nonfiction narrative is its kind of own little short film. You're going to have multiple characters or a character, and that character wants something and they're trying to get it, and it's going to move the story forward. So in this one, I did something very, very simple. I start off with a very, very simple scene, nothing too dramatic, just something that I could put together just using myself to show you some narrative principles and how we're going to use those for the rest of this series. All right, let's just go ahead and watch the first scene that I've created. It's a very simple, basic scene between two characters, being me, Spencer 1 and Spencer 2. Let's go ahead and watch that now. Come in, watch the dog. Gonna get you a drink, get you a beer. Yeah, I love a drink, for sure. So I've got beer, I've got LaCroix. It's not too early for a beer, is it? I mean, we're in a pandemic after all. I mean, what's the difference? Maybe, if you have some light beer. I'm kind of on a diet right now. What? No, of course not. Coffee it is. Oh, please don't give me that fancy stuff. I probably can taste the difference anyway. Oh, well, there's only pour-overs in this house, and they're always going to be naturally processed Ethiopians. Alright, so how about that drink? Whoa, stop. You never take a sip of a hot cup of coffee. A, because the flavor gets more pronounced as it gets closer to your body temperature, and B, because it's a hot freaking cup of coffee. What are you trying to do, burn your mouth? Alright, sorry, I think. Alright, so we'll just sit here for a second, we'll let the coffee cool. Alright, now you can drink your coffee. Really? I can take a drink? Great. Do you have any creamer? Okay, so that was obviously nothing too dramatic. It was just a way for me to kind of show off some very simple narrative principles. So the first thing that I kind of do when I start to write a scene is first I need to pick out my characters. Generally speaking, you're going to have either one character that's trying to get something, or you're going to have two characters, and they both have a motivation in the scene. Now, without this motivation, your characters have nowhere they want to go. So just at the start, you need your characters to want something, to need something, to try to get somewhere. So your characters need a place to go. Otherwise, what's really the point of the story? And so where drama comes in is when you have 1, 2, 3 mini characters, or one character even, trying to get somewhere, but then you have obstacles along the way. Now, a lot of times that will be between one character and another character. So one character, let's just say Spencer 1, for instance, wants something. Spencer 1, for instance, wants to walk in here and get a nice relaxing drink, whereas Spencer 2 doesn't really care that much about the drink and is standing in his way. So moving forward, you'll notice I say Spencer 1 when I'm talking about the one that wants the drink, and Spencer 2 when I'm talking about the one that's sitting there on his phone. So I think it's pretty clear here that Spencer 1 is kind of a drink snob. Whether it comes to beer or coffee, he really cares a lot about what he's drinking, which is kind of like who I am in reality. I don't like to just drink whatever. I don't like to just consume whatever. I try a little harder at it. So let's go ahead and start this scene. I'm going to kind of break down what's going on in the scene. So they first walk into the house. Yes, it was very complicated to make me be in 2 places at once, especially when I'm not good at After Effects or anything like that. I usually just use DaVinci Resolve to edit all this stuff. Which reminds me, you definitely want to subscribe to the channel if you want to see how I shot and lit this scene, because I'm going to break that down in my next video. Okay, so just right out of the gate, we know that we have 2 characters. One of them is asking the other one if he wants a drink when they enter the room. Something very common that you see when people come in, being hospitable in their house, they're going to offer you a drink. Little does Spencer number 2 know that Spencer number 1 takes his drinking very seriously. I mean, we're in a pandemic after all. I mean, what's the difference? Maybe. You have some light. So Spencer 1 is obviously trying to offer him something kind of special, either a nice beer or a LaCroix even, not just regular water. But then Spencer number 2 says that he's on a diet and he's asking for a light beer, which clearly Spencer number 1 doesn't like very much. Maybe you have some light beer. I'm kind of on a diet right now. What? No, of course not. And so he looks for an alternative to make a compromise. He's not going to get too annoyed yet by Spencer number 2. So he's going to make coffee. Coffee is a diet drink. It has no sugar in it. It has to be a good compromise where he can make something still special and be hospitable to Spencer number 2. Oh, well, there's only pour-overs in this house, and they're always. But then very quickly, Spencer number 2 realizes that Spencer number 1 is going to make a pour-over, and he's immediately put off because he's like, don't make any of that fancy stuff. He doesn't care about the fluff. But then Spencer number 1 insists on making something that's still special, and he starts making the pour-over. And then he obviously talks about his snobbiness and how he only likes to use naturally processed Ethiopians. So we go into the next part of the scene, you can see that neither one of the characters are changing. They're both sticking with their guns and how they are as a character. So Spencer number 2 decides he wants to take a drink, which Spencer number 1 definitely does not like because it's a hot cup of coffee and he never drinks hot cup of coffee. All right, so how about that drink? Whoa, stop. You never take a sip of a hot cup of coffee. A, because the flavor gets more pronounced as it gets closer to your body temperature, and B, because it's a hot freaking cup of coffee. What are you trying to do, burn your mouth? So he's finally getting a little bit annoyed, and he has to stop Spencer number 2 in his tracks and tell him to stop drinking that coffee, which Spencer number 2 is like a little standoffish. He backs up. He lets Spencer number 1 have his moment. So then we see that Spencer number 2 is finally realizing Spencer number 1 is taking this very seriously, and he asks for permission to drink his coffee. Spencer number 2 takes a nice slurp. Yes, I pardon my nose hairs in that close-up shot, but what are you going to do? I did not trim before I shot this video. Do you have any creamer? And then to top it all off, Spencer number 2 wants creamer in the coffee. Generally speaking, when you write a narrative film, you want your characters to move forward in their story, trying to get what they want, and then by the end of that story, you want to have a character change. Now, you don't always have to have this, but a common way of writing a story is that the hero or your character will eventually have a change of character by the end of the story, and that can happen in many different ways. But for the sake of this, I'm just breaking down one scene. I wanted to kind of show just the principles of characters and how they both want one thing and how they're getting in the way of each other's wants. So in this scene, Spencer number 1 wants to have a nice drink, a nice beverage, whereas clearly Spencer number 2 doesn't really care about the beverage and is getting in the way of Spencer number 1's wants. So to add more drama to this, we could have Spencer number 2 have another want that is also directly conflicting with Spencer number 1. So maybe he doesn't just not want a fancy beverage, but he really wants a different kind of beverage, and Spencer number 1 doesn't have it, and they're both trying to get what they want, but they're getting in the way of each other doing that. And that's where the drama comes from, the conflict. And you need conflict in the scene to create tension in scenes and move characters forward. Without conflict, there will be no change. So obviously asking for creamer was the last thing that Spencer number 1 wanted, and it just goes to show that there was going to be no change in these characters. So that just kind of shows off some basic principles of a scene. So you have enough of these scenes and enough of these characters combined, scene after scene after scene, and you're going to create a story that's moving forward. That's how you would get like a movie or a TV series. You have enough of these little scenes that are creating conflict and little bits of change, which leads to the next scene, which will create more conflict for our main character, or will help change our main character more, or help that character get what they want in the end. But the first thing that I start off with writing a scene is a character and their wants. Plot kind of comes second. I think that you might want to start writing plot immediately when you sit down to write a story, but plot is just something that's a device to add conflict to the story. Or, like a very common phrase is, take an ordinary person and put them in an extraordinary situation. So you take a regular character and then you throw them into a grand plot, which is going to make that character do things that they normally wouldn't do. Either way, we're taking a character that has a wants and we're adding conflict to those wants, which creates our story. So let's take a break real quick to talk about today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to build your presence online. You can use it to showcase your work or portfolio, or maybe to show off the short film that you might create using the principles that I just talked about. Because what's the point of creating something if you can't share it with an audience and have a place for it to live? And Squarespace makes that really easy because they've got awesome templates to start your website with. But not only that, they have awesome customizable features so you could quickly embed your film into a page, give it a title, and give it a nice place to live. You could even put behind the scenes photos on there, maybe a little video commentary. It's just a place that you can make something live on the internet without any hassle. So if that's something that interests you, go to squarespace.com/SpencerSakurai to get a free trial and 10% off your first purchase of website or domain. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these principles a lot more in the future, but this is just a basic scene that I decided to write. It's kind of funny, but going forward in this series, I'll probably write something a little bit more dramatic, and we're going to add more layers of complexity to these scenes as we go forward. Now, I just learned a lot of this myself in film school, as well as watching movies myself and just kind of dissecting what's going on, and I'm just going to best share that with you guys what I know. I'm not an expert on the subject. I'm not a screenwriter, but I want to learn more, and so I thought this was a good way to exercise my writing muscles. And then coming up, I'm going to do more scenes like this, maybe a little bit more dramatic, and I'm going to try to light them a little differently, and it's going to give us a lot of stuff to look at when it comes to basic narrative filmmaking, and by the end of it, I'm going to try to make my own short film. So definitely hold me accountable to that, because otherwise it may not get done, but we're going to do our best to make it happen. So I'm Spencer Sakurai. Until next time, guys, see ya.